Okay, this is the Unit 10 test review for PreAP. Alright, so this whole unit was about rational functions and pretty much adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and also solving. So on the first one, all we're doing is we're simplifying. So we have to factor first. So the factors of the numerator are going to be x plus 6 and x plus 2. And then the factors of the denominator are going to be x plus 6, x minus 3. So when you're simplifying, I'm just looking at the tops and the bottoms, and I'm just looking to see what's the same. So top, bottom. So my solution, or its simplified form, will be what is left. So that's just x plus 2 over x minus 3. Okay, on the next bit, it's just doing adding and subtracting. I'm just going to do one of each. So on these, again, you have to have a common denominator. And then the other thing that's important to remember is that whatever you do on the bottom, you have to do on the top. Okay, so looking at number 7, first of all, I notice that there's a special pattern. And I know that that's x plus 5, x minus 5. Well, this one already has an x minus 5, so it's just going to need the x plus 5. And now they're alike. But again, whatever I do on the bottom, I got to do to the top. Okay, so I'm going to write my common denominator down here. So that's going to be x plus 5, x minus 5. So the only thing that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to focus on that numerator. So I'm focusing right there. Okay, so what I have is I have 2x plus 7 minus 3 times x plus 5. Got to make sure I distribute, and that's probably one of the most important things about that negative is making sure that you just distribute it. So that gives me 2x plus 7 minus 3x minus 15. And if I go a little bit further, I get negative x minus 8. Now, I'm actually going to factor that negative out. So if I factor that negative out, that flips all that to a positive. Now, there's no other simplifying that I can do. So that is my final answer. Okay, on the next one, again, I'm adding, so I have to have a common denominator. So if this has an x plus 3, or I'm sorry, x plus 4, that means this has to have an x plus 4. And if that has an x minus 4, this has to have an x minus 4. Okay, I know my common denominator is going to be x minus 4, x plus 4. Okay, so again, I'm only going to focus on what's going on with the numerator. So if I do that, I have 6x. I have 6 times x minus 4 plus 5 times x plus 4. Okay, so I'm just going to do a bunch of distributing and combining. So 6x minus 24 plus 5x plus 20. That gives me 11x minus 4. And there's no other simplifying I can do here, so that's my final answer. Okay, so now we're going to get into adding and subtracting. So with adding and with multiplying and dividing, you don't need a common denominator, but you have to factor. Like you have to look for factoring everywhere. So even though we don't see like an x squared somewhere, what you do have to notice is that a 7 can be pulled out of that. So here, what I'm going to have is I have p plus 7 over p minus 10 times p plus 2. Now, I'm going to take a 7 out of that. And when I do that, I'm left with p plus 2. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start simplifying it. So I have to have one thing on the top and one thing on the bottom. That's the same. So here we go. And it doesn't matter where it's at. It can be over here and over here, as long as it's on top and bottom. So top, bottom. So what I have is I have p plus 7 over p minus 10. But I also have the 7 right here. So I'm going to put that in parentheses and then put that right there. Okay, with dividing, it's pretty much the same thing, but before you have to make sure you do keep change flip though. So again, I notice that I can factor here, and I can pull out an 8, and that's what I'm left with. Now, I will need to flip this, so this will go to the top. Alright, so I'm going to keep the first one. I'm going to flip the division to multiplying. And then I'm going to have 8 times n minus 6 on top and 4n on the bottom. And again, it's all about top, bottom. It doesn't matter where it is as long as 1 is on the top, 1 is on the bottom. 1 is on the top, 1 is on the bottom. And the only thing I have left is 8. Okay, let's look at number 13. Again, I'm noticing the division sign, so I'm going to keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep this one, so a to the third over bc, times, and then I'm going to flip this, so 21b over 9a. Now, another way to think about this is if I take those a cubed and actually list them out, so a times a times a, then what I can do is I can just start kind of canceling out. So again, top, bottom, top, bottom. So what I have left is I have 21a squared over 9c. Now, if I divide all, 21 and 9 can both be divided by 3. So that gives me 7a squared over 3c. Okay, on this one here I'm multiplying, and I notice I can do a bunch of factoring here. There's a lot of factoring. So I'm going to factor all that out. So on top, I would just have 2x minus 7. And then I would have x plus 5 on the bottom and x plus 5 on the bottom. My factors on top would be x plus 5, x plus 1. And again, this is a special pattern. So the square root of 4 is 2, so 2x. Square root of 49 is 7, so 2x minus 7. And I'm also going to have a 2x plus 7. Okay, so again, I'm back to just looking for top and bottom. Doesn't matter where they are. Top, bottom, top, bottom. So what I'm now left with, just on the top, is the x plus 1. And then on the bottom, I'm left with x plus 5 and 2x plus 7. Okay, let's look at number 16. That'll be the last one I do on multiplying and dividing. Okay, so on 16, again, I can see I can factor here. But what you also need to notice is you can see the numerator and denominator here. So when you see something just standing there alone, it's always over 1. Now, because I'm dividing, I will need to flip this. So the 1 will go to the top now. Okay, so that's a special pattern. So x minus 7, x plus 7, all over x plus 2. So I'm going to keep that. I'm going to change the division to multiplying, and then I'm going to flip. And again, I'm right back to top and bottom. Top, bottom. So I'm left with 1 times x plus 7 over x plus 2, but again, I don't need that 1 there. So that's my answer. Okay, now we're going to start getting into solving these. So when you're solving these, you have to have a common denominator because even though it doesn't really look like it, we are kind of adding and subtracting fractions. So I do need to have the common denominator. But if you look at number 20, 20 is where you're actually going to cross multiply. Now your teacher may have taught you a different way. I went with cross multiplication. Okay, so let me do number 18. So first of all, you got to know so you can factor that. So I can pull out a p there, and I'm left with a p plus 1. And same thing here, I can pull out a p there, and I'm left with a p plus 1. So this is going to be my common denominator. I've got a p and a p plus 1, p and a p plus 1. Well, this just has a p plus 1. So what else does it need? It already has that, so it just needs a p. So I'm going to multiply this whole thing by p, and whatever you do on the bottom, you got to do to the top. Okay, so I'm going to clear my denominator, and I'm only focusing on what's going on up here in the numerator. So that gives me p plus 5 equals 1 minus p, and then p minus 6. Okay, so here I would have p plus 5 equals 1 minus p squared plus 6p. Now, I'm noticing a p squared here, and I also notice that I'm not going to be able to cancel it out. So what I need to do is, I need to make this equal 0 so I can factor it and solve it. Now, I don't want that p squared to be negative, so I'm actually going to add it to the other side. But then I also need to get rid of all this, so I'm going to subtract this over. And I'm doing it all at once, and I'm just making sure I line up all my like terms. Okay, so if I come over here and start combining, I still have the p squared. That gives me a negative 5p. And then here I have a positive 4. And that all equals 0. So if I factor that, that gives me x minus 4, or p. X minus 1, I'll change it to p. Alright, so p equals 4, and p equals 1. Now, I need to kind of go back and talk about extraneous solutions. So for instance, on this one here, you can't divide by 0. So for instance, p here could not be negative 1 because I'd get a 0. And p here can't be 0 because I would get dividing by 0. It would be undefined. So since neither of those answers are the same as this, these are both valid solutions. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Now on this one, I'm looking for a common denominator, and it's not jumping out at me right away. I know that I have to have an x in it because there are x's here, but I guess I'm kind of seeing 30. And I could do 3 times 2 is 6, times 5 is 30. So I'm going to make my common denominator 30x, which means I'm going to multiply that by 6x. Whatever I do on the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. Now to get to 30 here, I just have 30x, I have to multiply by 15. And then to get to 30x here, I'm going to multiply by 10. Okay, so again, I'm only focusing on what's going on in the numerator. So I have 10 times x plus 2 minus 4 times 15, which is 60, equals 18x. So if I distribute that, I get 10x plus 20 minus 60 equals 18x. That gives me 10x minus 40 equals 18x. I'm just going to kind of keep going here. And, oops, we're off the page. And x equals negative 5. All right, on number 20, again, I'm going to cross multiply. So that's going to be a little bit different than the ones we did where you had to have a common denominator. And really make sure you notice what the difference is with these. Like on these, you usually have one thing equaling two things, or two things equaling one thing. But when you're cross multiplying, you have one thing equaling one thing. So on this one, I'm just going to set my problem up. All right, and then I'm going to start distributing. And then I'm just going to start solving. And x equals 4. Okay, let's flip it over. All right, on 21, again, I have one thing equaling one thing, so I'm going to cross multiply. So that would give me x minus 3 times x plus 2 equals x times x plus 5. I'm going to factor this out, so that gives me x squared minus x minus 6 equals x squared plus 5x. I think I said factor that out. I'm multiplying that out. Okay, so now I'm going to start solving for x. So I notice if I move this over, that actually cancels out the x squareds. So now I don't really need to worry so much about factoring. So now I'm just going to start solving for x. So I'm going to add the x over here. So that gives me negative 6 equals 6x. And if I divide that, I get x equals negative 1. Now, this will be a valid answer because here x can't be negative 2 and x can't be negative 5. Okay, let's go into the word problems. So the format on the word problems is you want to have 1 over time alone plus 1 over time alone equals 1 over time together. So it's always a 1 on top. So this says, Roy and Ryan are building robots for a science project. Ryan built a robot last year by himself in 8 hours. Okay, so this can be Ryan, so 1 over 8. And Roy built his in 6 hours. So this is Ryan, and this can be Roy, so 1 over 6. How much time would it take this year if they worked together? Well, I don't know their time together. So when we don't know things in algebra, we put an X. Okay, so again, it's almost like I'm adding fractions. So you have to have a common denominator. So some of y'all will notice that there's 24. Some of y'all will notice it's 48. A quick way to do it is if you just kind of multiply everything, 8 times 6 times x is 48x. So what I'm going to do, though, is I notice the 24. So my common denominator is going to be 24x. So what I'm now doing is I'm going to multiply everything to get to that. So times 24, whatever you do on the bottom, do the top. So it's all about getting each of those denominators to 24x. Alright, once I do that, I can clear my denominator. And so what I now have is I have 3x plus 4x equals 24. That gives me 7x equals 24. And then I'm going to divide by 7. So x equals 24/7 hours. Now, the equation is what I originally wrote in purple. So that's going to be 1 over 8 plus 1 over 6 equals 1 over x. Okay, on 25, Erica can paint her room in 5 hours. So that's Erica's working alone. Takes her 5 hours. If she has her friend Rachel help her, they can paint the room together in 3 hours. So that's going to be after this, so 1 over 3, because that's their time together. How long would it take Rachel to paint the room alone? Well, I don't know. So 1 over x. Okay, again, so if I'm looking for a common denominator, I can just multiply straight across. So 5 times 3 is 15, times x is 15x. So everything I do here is going to try to get this to 15x. So times 5x, times 5x, times 15, times 15, times 3x, times 3x. Okay, so what I now have left is I have 3x plus 15 equals 5x, and then I'm just going to start solving. So minus 3x, 15 equals 2x, and then divide by 2, so x equals 7 over 2. Okay, or 3.5 hours. Okay, on this one over here, okay, and then the equation is 1/5 plus 1x equals 1/3. Okay, on the back, okay, so here I'm determining whether -4 is the solution. Now the most important part here is to figure out what makes it undefined, what makes it equal 0. So here, if I have x equaling -4, -4 plus 4 is 0, and this would be undefined, which means that this is not a solution. Not a solution will make it undefined. Alright, on the math review, so down here, it's all about factoring, so I got to find GCF here. So I'm going to pull out, it looks to me like a y squared. They all have y squared in common. So I'm going to pull out a y squared, And when I do that, I have 3x squared minus 17x minus 28. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to factor this by doing grouping. So 28 times 3 is going to be 84. So what two numbers will multiply to get negative 84 and combine to get negative 17? Okay, so I can do 1 and 84. I can do 2 and 42. I can do 3 and 28, which means I can also do 4 and 21. Oh, I think that'll do my 17. And then this would have to be the negative. Okay, so if I do factor by grouping here, and there it is. Okay, so I have to make sure I still keep the y squared. And then one of them is x minus 7, and then the other one is 3x plus 4. So that's my final answer. Okay, on 30 here, let's go straight to that one. This is that special pattern. So really you need to look at the numerators, the denominators, and the variables. So the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of 49 is 7, and then put an x. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Now, one of them will be a plus, and one of them will be a minus. The square root of 16 and 81 is 4 and 9. And then the square root of y squared is y. And then the same thing over here. Alright, on this one here, I'm trying to find a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply that by 4. And multiply that by 4. That gives me 3x over 12 plus 16y over 12. These cannot be combined. So I end up with just 3x plus 16y over 12. And all of these numbers cannot be divided by the same thing, so I just leave it like that. Alright, on this one here, I'm going to solve for x. Now, I'm going to get rid of that fraction first by multiplying by the reciprocal. And I notice what I can actually do here is I can kind of cross those 4's out, kind of the whole idea of the top and bottom. So 2x plus 7 equals negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. So that gives me 2x equals negative 12. And x equals negative 6. Alright, that's part of the review. Alright, if you need help on any of it, please make sure you let me know. And that's about it. Alright, good luck.